or PR, projection of rays, or you could do confrontation visual fields. And quantitative or objective method of looking at visual fields is the static perimetry, which could be the Humphreys or the octopus, or a kinetic perimetry such as the Goldman visual fields, which is very often used in neuro-ophthalmology, and I'll show you some pictures today. Or you could have the automated kinetic perimetry as well. So let's look at the subjective or the qualitative. The first we all do routinely, which is projection of rays. This gives us a very gross field effect. If the rays from a certain direction, which are shown into the patient's eye through a fixed collimated beam of light, like a torch, and the patient is unable to detect it from that direction, then there's a likelihood that he has a visual field problem in that direction. So projection of rays, of course, can be because of glaucomatous problems, it could be neuro-ophthalmic problems, it could be because of retina problems that you may have, and a problem with the projection of rays, or the patient being unable to tell from which direction is the light coming. This should ideally be done in a dark room. Here you can see a photograph on the left. This should ideally be done in a dark room or in bisopic illumination using a bright source of light, but a focused source of light. So even the indirect ophthalmoscope does very well here. And if you're asked to demonstrate it, you can use the indirect ophthalmoscope's beam of light to demonstrate it. The other is the confrontation field effect, a confrontation test, which you must know. Here what you're doing is you're comparing the patient's visual field with the examiner's visual field, or with your own visual field. So they ask the patient to close one eye, you close the corresponding other eye, so that, as you can see here, when you're sitting opposite, both the open eyes are facing each other and the closed eyes are facing each other, and you use a target and you bring it from the periphery to the center, and at whatever point the patient is able to see it, that is his visual field, or that is the extent of his visual field, and you can compare it with yourself. So if the examiner can see it, but the patient is unable to see it, that means that his field is probably constricted. So these all will give you a subjective kind of evaluation. You will not get a definitive objective evaluation. For the objective method, you have to use the static field, which is the Humphrey here, or the octopus, which you can see on your left side of the screen, or you can use the kinetic, as I said, which is the Goldman perimeter you can see on the right side of the screen. So the static perimeter basically means that there's a large bowl in which you get these spots of light coming and going, and the patient has to, press a trigger every time they see a light. This is typically the gold standard of fields and most often used in glaucoma. It's best for these central 30 degrees of field, but now you have machines which are giving you the full field as well. It is less operator dependent. The Goldman kinetic perimeter, on the other hand, the one that you see on the right, is dependent a lot on the operator, because the operator has to move the targets all along. The targets here don't just appear, they move from the periphery to the center, or the center to the periphery. And this is a full field, as you can see in this dome here. And this is generally better for patients with a little poorer vision, and you can actually monitor the fixation live. I'll show you that in the slide how it's done. So the Humphrey visual field, how would you perform it? So you have this LCD screen here where you choose the program, generally a 30-2, for example, for the 30-degree field, a 10-2 for the 10-degree field. And I won't go too much in detail of that because that's more of a glaucoma perspective. And then you have this dome where the patient keeps their head, one of the eyes is closed, and they look at a fixation target which looks like this on the bottom right of the screen. The central black dot here that you see shows the yellow lights. That is typically the fixation target that is used for these fields. But then you also have this 4 diamond here, a small diamond and a large diamond made by these lights. So patients with poorer fixation or central scotomas, you'll have to use this diamond fixation. So they may ask you, how do you fix it? Get a patient to fix it. If he's got a central scotoma, you can say that, we can change the fixation target to a large diamond. And this field is then, he's asked to press the button trigger every time he sees a flash of light. And you can vary the test speed sometimes in the newer machines. But essentially, the patient will then get a printout of a Humphrey, which looks like this at the end of this field. The whole printout is on the left. Let's break it up into 2 parts. The top half looks something like this here. You can see that there would be the patient demographic details, his age, the gender. The date of birth is very important because in these fields, we are actually comparing the patient's sensitivity with his age-matched controls. And you also get something known as fixation losses that you can see in the left column here. And you get false positive and false negative errors. Fixation losses refers to being able to see how well the patient was able to fixate in the center. So how the machine calculates this is that it gives a spot of the blind spot in the beginning and it charts out the blind spot. And during the test, randomly, it keeps giving a stimulus on the blind spot. So if the patient presses the trigger at that point, that means that they had moved their eye from the center because the blind spot had moved. And false positive errors are those errors which are seen where a person has pressed the trigger when there was no stimulus by the machine. A false negative error is an error where the person had seen the same, at the same point the person had pressed the trigger on a dimmer or a less intensity stimulus, and now when a brighter intensity stimulus was given, he did not. That's a false negative. So they saw it earlier and now they missed seeing it. Typically, for good reliable fields, we want the fixation losses to be less than 33% and the false positive and false negative errors to be less than about 20% or 15%, ideally. Then you get this plot, which is the total, the sensitivity plot. This tells you the gross sensitivity or the threshold values. And the higher the value, the more sensitive that spot is. So near the fovea, you'll get higher sensitivity. And you get a grayscale plot that you see here, which is essentially marking out the deviation, which we'll see in the next slide. The lower half of the field looks like this. You get a total deviation plot, which is now subtracting your sensitivities from what is of the normal age matched controls, and it gives you this value. You can see here that the field is kind of showing a little depression in the generalized sensitivity. And then you get a pattern deviation plot here, where the 7th highest point is marked as a 0 and everything else subtracted from it. And then you get this. This is more important because this tells you the pattern of field loss. As here you can see the pattern deviation in field, or the pattern of field loss is almost normal, is not much. More of it was a generalized depression. Apart from that, you get a mean deviation, a pattern standard deviation, a visual field index. Most of these have got more to do with glaucoma than neuro-ophthalmology. So we'll skip through, but you must know how to read a full Humphrey printout. Another machine is the Octopus, and not all of you will have access to this, so I've kept the printout here to help you see. This is what an Octopus printout looks like. This is by Hagstride. Humphrey was by Zeiss. This is very similar to Humphrey. It again gives you the demographic details on top. It gives you, in place of a grayscale plot, you get a colored plot here, which is telling you where the sensitivities are. And you have this sensitivity absolute values which come here. And you have something known as catch trials, which are essentially the equivalent to the fixation losses. And you have false positive negative errors mentioned here too, just as you would in a Humphrey visual field. And you have what is the total deviation plot, which is basically here called the probability score. And then you have the corrected probability score, which you are actually subtracting now, similar to a pattern standard deviation. So you're subtracting the 7th highest point. And a new feature here, or a feature which is different from the Humphreys, is this curve called the Bebe's curve. So this curve is giving you a rough idea of what the field looks like. All the points are plotted along this axis, and typically it should be within these two dotted lines, or the lighter lines that you can see here. And this dark line is actually what the field is represented. And I'll show you in 1 or 2 examples later how to interpret this curve. The Goldman visual field is a big bowl here, and you can see that there's an operator who sits on one side, looks through the eyepiece if you look at the bottom picture, and on the other side is the patient or the subject, and the operator is going to move the target or the stimulus with his hand here while making sure that the patient is seeing straight. So here you can vary the speed, as per the patient's cooperation. So in cases of Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, very often I use the Goldman visual field, and you get a printout which looks like this. These are all isopters, because these isopters are those lines which are matching, connecting similar sensitivity stimuli. So you get a different sized isopters. Here you can see 3 of them, 5,4E, 3,4E, and then there's a central 1,4E. And this red spot here is the blind spot that has been charted. And the bigger the Roman numeral, the bigger the size of the stimulus, the higher the alphabet, the finer the stimulus. So that's how we actually interpret this. So a 1,1A would be the 1,1E would be the smallest, and a 5,4A would be the biggest stimulus. So now let's come to the neuro-ophthalmology point of view. Now we know how these fields are done and how we interpret these fields. The good thing about neuro-ophthalmic fields is that you can localize the defects very logically, because we know our neuroanatomy very well. So you have both the eyes in front, the optic nerves which are coming from them, they're crossing over at the chiasma, then they become the optic tracts, then they go on to become the optic radiations, which are going from the parietal and the temporal lobe in the form of a Mears loop there, and they go to the occiput at the end of the occipital lobe. So based on where the field defect is, you can see where the location of the lesion is, you can get a field defect, and vice versa. So if you know the field defect, then you know where the location is. So for example, if I look at the second defect here, I can see that there is a loss in both the temporal fields. So I know this is at the chiasma. Similarly, if I get a homonymous or a similar looking field effect, so there's a loss in the same side of the vertical meridian, then I am looking far back near the occipital lobe or the optic radiations. So that's how you localize the field effects. So remember this chart in mind as we go along now. You will get to see a lot of fields which are classically similar to what is seen here. But remember, in real world and anatomy and biology is a little different from what textbooks would show. But still, in neuro-ophthalmology, they're very similar looking. So let's look at a few case examples. So this is a 60-year, and this is where the quiz starts. This is a 60-year-old male with bilateral optic atrophy. So both discs were showing a pallor, and then a 60-year-old male. So where is the lesion? And we can see here. So think about where the lesion is, and I'm going to keep describing this field. So we know that these are Goldmann visual fields done on the Goldmann kinetic perimeter, and it has been done using 3 isopters. The isopters have been named here: 5-4E, 3-4E. In fact, 2 isopters. And you can see that in the right field, you've actually the temporal half of the field is missing, and in the left field, the temporal half of the field is missing. And you can see why, because there are no blind spots visible. So we know that this is a bitemporal hemianopia. There you go. And in orange, I have marked out the area of the field which was missing. It should actually have been like this, the complete field. And so this is definitely a chiasmal lesion, probably a cellular lesion, like a pituitary or a adenoma in that area. The same bitemporal hemianopia on the octopus perimeter would look something like this. You can see here on the grayscale plots that the area with the blind spot in it, this blind spot is only representative. This is not the true blind spot. This is just to mark that. So you can see that on the left, the blind spot in the left eye field is dark, that is half of the field, and on the right side. See here though, the fields are not exactly congruent, and you can see that the right side is a little less than a complete bitemporal hemianopia. And this again is a chiasmal region. But remember, here what I have done is I have kept the right eye field on your right side and the left eye field on your left side. That is the right way of keeping it when you want to look at these bitemporal hemianopias. Sometimes you may keep it in the correct manner, where the right field is coming first and the left field is coming later, and you will actually, it may be a little confusing to see, but this also is a bitemporal hemianopia, just that the fields have been switched. So I've kept this here, that don't make a mistake. Always keep the fields on the correct side when you get them, and that's when you need to see what the field is. And remember, in neuro-ophthalmology fields, you always want to interpret both fields together. Just a one-eye field doesn't make sense. So you always must ask for what the field in the other eye is. So chiasmal lesions, if I look at different field effects that have been described over time, it could be anything, any one of these. You could have partial temporal field effects going on to full hemianopias. You could have a complete optic atrophy on both sides, where you can have a complete generalized depression or a complete washout of the visual field. So any of these could actually be there, remember. So it's not necessarily the classical bitemporal hemianopia only. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Where do you think is the lesion on this? Think about this while I'll describe these fields for you. So here we are seeing a Humphrey visual field of both the eyes. The right eye has been kept on your left here, the left eye has been kept on your right here, and that's been done to help you see which direction the field effect is. And you can see that on the grayscale plot or on the pattern standard deviation plot, you can see that there is a loss in the right temporal region, and in the left eye there is a loss in the left nasal area. So there is a right temporal and left nasal. And another thing I want you to note is that these are not congruous fields. You can see that the field effect in the right eye is a little different looking than the left eye. In the left eye, the bottom area doesn't seem to show a defect here in the nasal area. In the right top superior temporal, there is a difference. So that means these are incongruous fields. These fields are not exactly matching each other. A congruous point is a point on one eye's visual field which is exactly the same as the point on the other eye's visual field. So one eye versus the other eye, that is a congruous point. These fields, because they're looking a little different, are incongruous fields. So what you're getting is a right incongruous homonymous hemianopia. Why is it homonymous? Because it is of the same hemisphere vertically. And hemianopia because it's half the field, but it's incongruous. And so this is going to be seen in what is being known as the left optic tract lesion. Look here on this MRI here, you can see a large fibrous dysplasia of the sphenoid sinus, which is pressing on the optic tract at the back behind the chiasma. And this is what is causing the visual field effect. And this is an optic tract lesion. Incongruous is what you need to remember. Homonymous is what you need to remember. And it is a hemianopia. So when you look at optic tract lesions, look at these two, you'll see that they're not exactly congruous. You're getting a little different effect here and a little different effect here. Same way on the other side, but these are homonymous. So behind the chiasma, they start to become homonymous on the same hemisphere or same side of the vertical meridian, and on the ahead of the chiasma or at the chiasma, they are heteronymous. That's what we call them. And on the optic nerve, you'll get a bow tie atrophy or a bow tie pattern. Okay, this is another interesting field. Where do you think the lesion is of this? So you can see here that you can see both the eyes. In one of the eye, here you can see that there's a complete loss of visual field in the right eye, and in the left eye you can see that there is a loss only in the superior nasal area. Right, so full loss in one eye and a superior nasal loss in the other eye. This kind of doesn't seem to fall on anywhere, but we know that this is pathognomic of one place in the neuroanatomy pathway, and that one place is just ahead of the chiasma, called a junctional scrotoma. So when you have with how the fibers in the chiasma actually are crossing over is that we know that the nasal fibers of both the sides cross over, but the nasal fibers before they cross over, they actually take a little loop here and then they cross over. So when you get a field defect like this, when the optic nerve is affected very close to the chiasma, just anterior to it, you'll get a defect like this, and this can be seen in prefixed pituitary tumors, which are a little ahead and the chiasma is a little behind them, and so one eye complete loss, the other eye in just one quadrant, which is basically the temporal quadrant, superior-temporal. So this is known as the junctional scrotoma. So these are spotters that you may get. Okay, let's move on to the next question. A 35-year-old female with a bilateral secondary optic atrophy looks like this. You get to see a disc pallor here. Both the fundi are showing this is a secondary optic atrophy. So optic atrophies can be primary or secondary. You will learn about that in the previous talks in your PG program. So the secondary optic atrophy, it's a dirty looking disc, blurred margins, kind of waxy pallor, grayish looking, details are not very visible, the cup is obscured. This is a secondary optic atrophy. And we see this, we all know that we see this in papilledema, when there is a edema of the disc for a long time. And the fields that come along with this are highly constricted fields. See, you can see only the central island of field is left, the rest of the fields have become constricted. So constricted visual fields are seen in papilledema. All right, and the reason for papilledema could be IIH, idiopathic intracranial hypertension, as was for this lady, or it could be a space-occupying lesion. So whenever you see a field defect like this, you need to investigate, do an MRI. And this is what the field defect on the Goldman will look like. So the same patient underwent the Goldman visual field, and you can see only a small circle of the field is visible. Remember, while in a Humphrey perimeter or an octopus perimeter, the loss of field area is marked with a black color. Here in the Goldman, you're only seeing what the active field is. The rest of it is assumed to be lost. All right. So it will never mark out the lost area for you. A special field, sometimes they may ask you that if somebody is having a papilledema, early papilledema, what can you look for? The constricted visual field changes come very last. The answer here is that you want to look for the blind spot. So this is a special program for blind spot charting in the octopus. And we know that the blind spot is what increases in size first. And it's also visible on the Humphrey. But this is a special program, so you should know if you ever get this in a spotter that this is a blind spot charting. All right. Now let's look at this field. Is this a neuro-ophthalmology problem? So all of you look at this field. Is this a neuro-ophthalmology problem? You can see the right eye field looks more or less okay. Mild generalized depression here, mild depression. In the left eye, when you look at it, you can see that there is a problem in the nasal field of the left eye, and the OCT here is showing you that there is a superior thinning on the OCT. So a nasal field defect, an isolated nasal field defect, is this a neuro-ophthalmology problem? While we ponder on that, let's look at the Bebes curve here. See, in the right eye, you can see that the Bebes curve is doing well. From the top here, it moves on to the bottom, almost parallel to these two lines, which means it's just generalized depression. But see what happens in the left eye. It falls short. So whenever it falls short, that means there is a definitive localized defect. And when the whole curve comes low, that means the whole field is depressed. So this is what the Debye curve looks like, and I'll show you in some more octopus perimetry later if I have. But no, this is actually not a neuroophthalmic field defect because this is a nasal step. Nasal step is seen in glaucoma, all right. And here you can see that why? Because the field is actually respecting the vertical, the horizontal meridians. And so you can, in glaucoma, typically you'll get arcuate defects, which may look like this, which start from the blind spot and then move on. Or you can get biarcuate or advanced defects. And this is what a progression in a glaucoma may look like, from early to moderate to severe to advanced. And so remember that you have to be able to differentiate glaucomatous field defect from a neuroophthalmic field defect. So nasal step is not a neuroophthalmic field defect. Okay, let's look at this. Where do you think the lesion is on this octopus perimeter, octopus field that you can see? You can see both these sides. There is an inferior, it's in the right eye, there is an inferior nasal field defect. In the left eye, there is an inferior temporal field defect. Looking at the grayscale, in the Debye curve, you can see both of them fall sharply below. They don't go till the end. And this is essentially, so let's look at, is this field defect congruous? Almost congruous, but not completely. So there are areas on one field here which are little different than areas on the other field. Is it homonymous? Yes, it is homonymous. It is on the same side of the vertical meridian. So this is a more congruous, but not completely congruous. So still an incongruous, but homonymous field defect in the lower inferior part of the field or the inferior quadrant. This is known as a pie in the floor defect. All right. The same thing, if it happened in the superior quadrant, would be a pie in the sky. So a pie in the floor, because it looks like a piece of the pie, is seen in when the optic radiation is damaged. So a left homonymous inferior quadrantinopia, because it's affecting one quadrant, is a pie in the floor, and it is happening here where the parietal field is getting, parietal optic radiations in the parietal lobe are getting affected. If the optic radiations in the temporal lobe are getting affected, you would get a pie in the sky. When it's getting the parietal, it's a pie in the floor. So you also need to know which side here it is. In this case, it is happening on the left optic radiation. So if the left side field defect, it's the left optic radiation which is getting affected. Now let's move on to another one. Where do you think the lesion is in this field? Let's break it down again. This is a Humphrey visual field. So you must always mention this is a Humphrey visual field of a patient XYZ, age so and so, done on this date. The field is showing is reliable because the fixation losses, the false positive and false negative, are within acceptable norms. It's a 30-2 program that has been used. So that's how you describe the field whenever you get a field. And here you can see, let's quickly come to the field defect. On the right side, you can see the superior temporal area is showing a field defect. On the left side, it is the superior temporal again. So temporal, this is a heteronymous kind of a field defect. And in the bottom, you can see that there is a field defect in both, but it kind of doesn't settle anywhere. It crosses the vertical meridian. Yes, it's not homonymous either. So it's a little odd, difficult one to guess. So this is actually a bitemporal superior quadrantinopia, which is seen in chiasmal lesions. And early pituitary adenomas can cause this. The inferior field loss here was due to a deep set eye. So remember that sometimes if the eye is deep set, the inferior maxilla may be very prominent and you can get field defects there. So you should know that there are other reasons for field defects other than just problems of the eye alone. And going back to that chart of chiasmal lesions, you can see the very first one here, which is showing these superior quadrantinopia. Our fields are very similar looking to that. Forget the inferior portion of the field. Let's look at the next one. Where is the lesion here? Let's break it up as you would. This is a Humphrey visual field of a 30-2 protocol, and it is showing that there is a field defect which is homonymous. And it is respecting the vertical meridian. It is on the right eye. It is in the nasal area. In the left eye, it is in the temporal area. So temporal and nasal of one is homonymous. You can also see that they're very congruent, very similar looking, not much difference. So this is almost a congruent homonymous field defect called as a left homonymous field defect. And this is seen because of an infarct here. You can see in the occipital region. If you can see this here, gliosis. So an infarct, a chronic infarct in the right occipital region in this area is what has led to this field defect. So remember, as when it gets more congruous, as you move behind in the visual pathway, and homonymous after you're moved behind the chiasma. So if you remember these basic concepts, you'll be able to tell localize where the lesion is. So another left homonymous hemianopia, you can see here, similar to the other one. Here again, you can see an infarct, and you can see this horn of the occipital lobe is much larger in this MRI. So again, it's a multiple infarcts, but a posterior parieto-occipital infarct again leading to this. So another homonymous hemianopia. Okay, let's come to the next one. A 34-year-old female with subacute vision loss in the right eye. So there's a female who's lost vision in the right eye. You can see what looks like a central or a centrocecal defect here on the pattern sign deviation and on the grayscale, a centrocecal. But remember, when you're in your examination, you're not going to jump straight to the grayscale. You have to describe all this and then you can come there. It's a centrocecal. So what can cause central field loss? Optic neuritis. So this is a female who had optic neuritis. You can see the papillitis picture here. That is what led to the central field loss. So visual field defects in optic neuritis can be very variable. They could be central, paracentral, altitudinal, nasal. I mean, they could be anything, any one of these modes. So in optic neuritis, there's no defined field defect. But if you were to think of one, it's probably the central field vision loss, central field loss, which is probably most closest to what optic neuritis would often see. Okay, let's come to another one. This is an interesting one, step tougher than the previous. Where do you think the lesion is on this? This is not even forming a quadrantenopia now. So it's an octopus field defect. Again, if I was to show you the Debye's curve, there's a sharp drop off here on both sides. And what is happening on your right field, you can see that there is a inferotemporal, there is a part of the quadrant has gone, not the entire thing. And in the left, there is an inferonasal part of the quadrant, somewhat going up to the central fixation. So looking at this, these fields, are they congruous? Somewhat congruous, yes, because it's a very similar looking area, except for this jump across the midline that sometimes could be artifactual if the patient has lost fixation. Is it homonymous? Yes, it is homonymous. So as per our rule, if it's congruous and it's homonymous, then we're looking at it to be as far back in the visual pathway as possible. And here you can see that it was actually a homonymous incongruous inferotemporal field defect. There were multiple infarcts, of course, but in the MRI, you can see that the occipital region was very much affected. And that is why you had that appearance. So again, remember, if you look at the field, you do it logically, you can get to where the field defect should be. Okay, let's move on to the next question. What are the differential diagnoses of such a field defect? You can see in the right eye, the field looks completely normal. In the left eye, you get a small central looking scotoma. So again, when you see a central field loss, what do you think are the differentials? All of you, think of 5 reasons why you can have a central field loss. And then we'll come to the answer. Okay, so in central scotomas, you could have problems causing central scotomas right from the anterior segment to the posterior segment. In the anterior segment, corneal opacity, small corneal opacities, cataracts can cause it, optic nerve problems, optic neuritis, traumatic neuropathies, toxic optic neuropathies. They're quite pathognomic of toxic neuropathies, but that's usually both the eyes. In the retina, you could have AMD, CNVM, CSR. So there are a lot of reasons for why a central field loss could happen. So if somebody shows you a picture like that, you should actually be able to mention all these from front to back, everything which is affecting the central vision. So this is again just another central scotoma, a little denser. Okay, let's come to this one. This is an interesting field. It had me slightly perplexed as well at one point. You can see that you're getting a Humphrey visual field on both the sides, and you're seeing that there is a difference on the nasal aspect here and a nasal aspect in the other eye. So binasal field defect. What causes binasal field defects? Think about what you think can cause a binasal field defect. All of us know bitemporal field defects are seen in pituitary adenomas, but what causes binasal field defects? So binasal field defect, like deep set eyes, there was a prominent nasal bridge that this patient had. So when he did that, he couldn't see the nasal side of the field, or he missed some of it. But the other reasons that you could have rarely, keratoconus can cause it, retinitis pigmentosa can cause it, you get a ring scotoma, part of that may be caught. Optic nerve drusen's can cause it, aneurysms of the carotid artery, intracranial portion of the internal carotid artery can cause. So these are rare defects, but you may get them. So you should know at least about them, even if it just comes as a part of your viva. A 28-year-old male with bilateral vision loss on ATT. I think ATT is the giveaway here. So you're getting this kind of central field loss in both the eyes. Can you see that there is a central field loss here? Remember now, sometimes the grayscale may not be representative. The grayscale doesn't kind of show you all that much of a central field. When you look at this pattern field deviation plot, you can see that the central field loss is affected. There is a generalized depression, but within that, it is the central which is worst hit. So a both eye central field loss in a patient on ATT, ethambutol, you're suspecting toxic optic neuropathy. The same patient underwent a Goldman kinetic perimetry, and you can see the central field defect is very evident here. And there's a temporal pallor in both the optic discs. So that is quite typical of a toxic optic neuropathy. Okay, let's come to a female, elderly female, sudden vision loss in the right eye. The field looks like this. How do we describe this field defect? Now, this is a little different because here it is a field defect which is kind of respecting the horizontal median. It doesn't appear to be similar to what our neuroophthalmic fields are. So, what is causing this? Or how do you describe this field defect? Is this field defect an arcuate field defect? No, it's not an arcuate field defect because an arcuate field defect would be in the Jerum's area and would be continuous with the optic nerve or the disc or the blind spot here. This is called an altitudinal field defect. An altitudinal field defect is including superior altitude or it could be an inferior altitudinal field defect affecting half the field above. And this is quite typical for ischemic optic neuropathies, NAIO, and this you can see here is an inferior altitudinal field defect associated with a superior NAIO, and so you get a disc margin, disc edema with some pallor, and this is because. And why do you think it is in this meridian? Why is it in the horizontal way? Because that's how the vessels are dividing. So in ischemia, the vasculature always divides into superior and inferior quadrants. That's how the vasculature in the eye is and in the optic nerve, and therefore you get an altitudinal field defect. Remember, if you see this, first thing that should come in your mind is NAION, non-arthritic ischemic optic neuropathy. Rarely, optic neuritis can also cause this. So to summarize, always look at both the visual fields for neuroophthalmic cases. Remember their absolute defects. Remember the vertical midline. Remember where in that entire visual pathway the field defect could be, and to recognize that, you need to know, is it homonymous or heteronymous? Is it congruous or incongruous? Is it one eye or both eye? And based on that, you can actually localize it very easily. This chart here on the right is showing you the entire gamut of neuroophthalmic visual field defects. Remember, these are the classical presentations. Your actual presentations may differ from this. It may not be exactly as it is shown in this. So all of you are free. Feel free to get in touch with me on email if you have a doubt or you come across a field that you find is difficult or you wonder what this is. How do I describe this? I'll be happy to help you out. So you feel free to get in touch with me. And I think this takes a little bit. So I do thank Dr. Sinha to give this opportunity, and let me end by saying that I'm happy to take questions now. I'm sure all of you should have plenty of questions. And I'll put the video back. Yeah, there we go. Right, sir.
So if anybody has a question, can unmute yourself and ask directly.
Any questions from anybody? Try to flavor of all three visuals, the Goldman, the Octopus, and the Humphrey. Most centers would only have one usually, or maybe two. But the idea of this, that's why I had a mix of all, so that you're able to know what each field looks like. You shouldn't feel lost as to field is. And I don't know, sir, how much are we still doing Goldman perimetry around there, or we're doing it as neuro-ophthalmologists, I know, but whether they're having access.
Vijay, can we see the chat box?
the questions in the chat box.
How to assess an enlarged blind spot?
Right. So the blind spot is often visible on the Humphrey visual field as well as a black spot. Remember, it will be in the temporal part of the field. Typically, you will have the blind spot anywhere between 5 to 15 degrees, and generally it's about 5 degrees in size in terms of, so about 3 spots, black spots would be there. If it is enlarged, you will be able to, if it goes beyond that, you'll be able to tell. But like I said, there are specialized fields that we have, like the octopus blind spot charting method, or we use the Goldman field to actually assess the blind spot. So in that case, what we do is that we start by where the blind spot actually would be, and then we take the isopter and move it manually on the field beyond. And at the point that the patient can just see it, they press the trigger and we mark it. So we can get a blind spot figure size there. But that's how you assess it. Generally, most of the times, blind spots are grossly enlarged in cases of papilledema, and you can make it out quite easily.
That was the only question I could see in the chat box.
That's the only one right now.
Sir, I have one question here. May I ask this?
Certainly.
Yeah. What is true or false bearing of blind spot?
What is?
True and false bearing of blind spot.
True and false value of blind spot.
Bearing.
No, I didn't get it. True and false.
Bearing of blind spot.
Oh, okay. It is referring to the. It's probably referring to the margin that you're saying.
Somewhere it was written that if you are considering a larger isotope, then it would be false bearing, and if you are considering a small isopter, then it would be small true bearing. So what
bearing.
is exactly?
All right. Bearing. Sorry, I didn't understand that. I didn't get the word bearing. See, the word bear in English is basically to to remove the clothes off or to expose, right? We bear somebody. So now here, what is happening is that the blind spot, as you know, is of a certain size, right? If you're using a very large isopter, right, and a part of that stimulus actually goes a little bit beyond the blind spot. So think of this that the blind spot is a circle, right? If you can see, and this is your stimulus. If your stimulus part is little going outside, the patient will be able to see and he's going to press the trigger. But if you're using a very small isopter, like let's say a very small, it's just like a more fine, then just at the margin of the blind spot, the patient will be able to see. Right? Till then you won't be able to see. So in the larger isopters, you may actually miss the blind spot altogether, or you may not be able to see the complete blind spot, the true blind spot.
Okay.
Okay,
sir. Thank you, sir.
Sir, all the fields that you had shown today, were they 30-degree field or 90-degree field, sir?
No, the fields that I'd shown you for the Goldman kinetic perimetry were full fields. For the Humphreys and for the octopus, they were all 30-degree fields, except there were one or two which were actually 24-degree fields. But mostly 30 degrees what we do. Now that's another question sometimes whether whether the neuro-ophthalmic field should be 30-degree or should you always do full fields. So the answer there is actually that the full fields is are required because they're able to catch up a lot of the peripheral lesions first. I mean, so small meningiomas here or there. But most of the cases, most of the problems related to the neuro-ophthalmic conditions, particularly the optic nerve and anterior, are even you can get them in 30-degree fields. So a well done 30-degree field will tell you what is there, but it will tell you a little later than a full field. For example, in early chiasmal compression, you on a full field, you'll be able to tell that there is a temporal defect that is coming in. But in a 30-degree, it will only have to, till it reaches the 30-degree field, you won't be able to tell. So that's the advantage. But these are 30-degree fields. Most of the automated perimetry that we have, the full fields are there in very few high-end automated perimeters. Those are more expensive and with certain institutes, but generally not as reliable as a Goldman kinetic perimeter.
Sir, is there something like a neurological 120-degree program or something?
There is. So that is available in the so they call it a 66 degree in the Humphrey. So it's 66 on each side of the fixation. So that becomes 120. See, the temporal field is always larger than.
So when do we have to, when one should go for
when should we go for that? If you are strongly suspecting that there is a field defect that the patient should be having, or if you're going to follow up a case of a small pituitary microadenoma or a small macroadenoma, which will cause a small amount of compression, those cases you can do those periods. So this is a question by Dr. Abhishek, what are the false positive and false negative values? So 20 and 15% is what we normally take as the cutoff, and 33% for the fixation losses. But remember, these cutoffs in neuro-ophthalmic field sometimes can be a little different because they are all based on the reliability of the field. But if somebody has a large central scotoma, then no matter how hard you try, you will not be able to get a fixation loss of less than 30%. But you can use that large diamond to improve your results, the large diamond fixation option.
Sir, what is the meaning of this -2, 30-2 or 24-2?
So that is actually it's a program of the Humphrey. It talks about so that there is no so there is a -1 program also. So there is no field taken at the immediate vertical meridian. It is taken 1 point here and 1 point off that, and 30 refers to the full width of the full field size that is taken. So that's got about 76 points in it. The -1 will have a center, will have a point taken in the center, and then one after that. But they figured that do a comparison such as a hemifield, glaucoma hemifield test, or even to look at the vertical meridians, you don't have to have a point in the center. You should have one on both sides of the central meridian. That's when the -2 became popular.
The central horizontal meridian here we are talking about, right?
Horizontal and vertical, both. So there are no points on that. You see, the field never charts anything on the vertical meridian. That point in the center is never taken up in that. So it is taken one on this side and one on this side. That is the -2 program. 30-2, 10-2, 24-2. It could be anything.
Okay. Thank
and
you.
the digits refer to the extent of the field.
Okay.
When would you choose a 10-2? You would always choose a 10-2 when you want to monitor the central field, all right? So if you're looking at, let's say, toxic neuropathy or the central scotoma, you want to see the size of the central scotoma. That is when you look at the this thing, the central 10-degree field. That's when you do a 10-2 field. 30-2 is the standard, and 24-2 is somewhere in between. It's a faster field that you can do just for a screening. Okay, Abhishek put a point that generalized constriction of visual fields occur in which diseases? Right. So generalized constriction, which is the field which is getting constricted from out to in. There are 2 points here. Generalized depression is different, Abhishek, and generalized constriction is different. Generalized constriction you would see either in cases of papilledema, where there's increased raised ICT and the optic nerves are getting compressed, or you can sometimes get it in optic nerve gliomas when there's a tumor growing on the outside sheath of the optic nerve. While generalized depression, where the whole field is low, that can happen in optic neuritis, it can happen in a lot of optic nerve conditions where the vision is poor. Optic atrophies of any form. all of you can feel free to reach out to me on the email that shown drsingh.dikvijay@gmail.com if you have any queries anytime. We'll probably go and read up about neuro-ophthalmic field now and we'll get some more queries.
So I think we have come to the end of the session, and I would like to profusely thank Dr. Digvijay Singh for the wonderful presentation that he made and the wonderful interaction that we had today. We are really very grateful to you. I would like to inform the postgraduate that tomorrow we have a class by Dr. Naveen Jaykumar, who is the director at Darshan Eye Care from Chennai, and he will be speaking on neuroimaging. So we'll see all of you tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Today, especially for Dr. Digvijay, we had put it at 5:30, but tomorrow it will be at 5 p.m. again. So we'll see you tomorrow again. A big thank you to Intas Pharmaceuticals for bringing this together. And Dr. Digvijay, thank you so much once again. Thank you so much for your time and effort bringing this together. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.